Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm Michael LeBlanc, NRF Top Retail Voice for 2026 and Rethink Retail 2026 Top Retail Expert. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Rohit, welcome to The Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Michael. Very exciting.
Well, thanks for joining me on the mic. We were talking off mic that you and I have at least one thing in common. We went to
Right.
University of Toronto at Rotman, so it's great to reminisce a little bit about that. Where am I finding you today?
I'm in Toronto and in our headquarters in Brampton, which is One President's Choice Circle.
What a wonderful facility it is, too. I remember the first time, I don't know if you remember the first time you walked in, but the first time I walked in and looked the size of the cafeteria alone, I was like, wow, this is an impressive place. So if anybody hasn't had the opportunity, it's quite the place. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about yourself. We're also going to be talking about, in this podcast, you're going to be joining Retail Council of Canada on the stage in June. We'll get to that in a little bit, but basically, who are you and what do you do for a living?
You know, as we were starting off, my name is Rohit, and I'm part of the Loblaw digital team within Loblaw Companies. And my portfolio includes both e-commerce, which is across our food retail, which has 14 different banners. So, you know, likes of No Frills, Loblaw, Superstore, etc. Shoppers Drug Mart, which is our health and beauty offering. And then Joe Fresh, which is our apparel. And then I also lead our loyalty portfolio, which is PC Optimum. You know, hopefully many of the Canadians or listeners are part of the program, and so I'm very proud and privileged to have had the opportunity to lead this. I've been with the company for almost 7 years now, always on the digital side. You know, I sort of consider myself as a techie at heart. You know, I got my start in engineering, spent some time there. I've had the opportunity to work in various other industries as well. You know, I was in finance for a bit. I worked at a startup for a bit, and then finally landed here. At every place that I've been, the thing that's always been exciting to me is building products, solving customer problems, and figuring out essentially how to use technology to better all of our lives. So I'm always one of the, you know, eternal optimists, I want to call within our organization.
Well, that sounds like the through line. Now, you have a huge remit. I mean, that's a big portfolio. Either one of those, e-commerce or loyalty, would be big portfolios. Now, you have a team, the Loblaw digital team and the loyalty team. Talk about the clients that you serve and the animating principle behind the team. Not all organizations go to market with the way that Loblaw digital does, but talk about the animating principle. What gets everyone out of bed in the morning and focused on some pretty broad objectives?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And so I think, you know, one of the core principles internally is our purpose as a company, which is to help Canadians live life well. And I think that is a very grounding, very humbling purpose because truly, you know, at the size and scale that we are, we can impact many Canadians' lives. And we take that responsibility with a lot of, you know, I want to say obviously pride, but it comes with a level of responsibility that we take very seriously. And so, you know, like I said, our part of the team is the digital arm, and our mandate is pretty broad, as you said. But the way that we are organized is we are a full service team, meaning, you know, we've got everyone on the business side, every business function, as you can think of. We have our own technology teams, our product management functions, design, research. So it's a full service team, and it's pretty sizable because of the scale that we need to deliver on. However, we're also a heavily matrixed organization, and you know we sort of pride ourselves to say we are best at matrixed organizations, I believe, in this country. You know, almost everyone on, you know, including myself, we have a dual reporting relationship, one on the digital side, but I also have a boss on the retail side. And that sort of helps us align our goals, right? You know, we want to appear to the customer as a seamless omni-channel retailer. And this sort of form of like dual reporting matrixed organization helps us there.
It's so interesting you say that because I grew up in e-commerce. I was doing e-commerce in for Hudson's Bay, RIP Hudson's Bay, back in the late 90s. And even going back to those days, if you remember the go-go days of the 2000s, there was, you know, kind of two schools of thought that, you set up the digital e-commerce guys like they're separate and they're like competitors. Like it got pretty far out there. And I never bought into that. I think, how are you in service of the customer if you're fighting your colleagues? So this is what I think works so well about what you're describing about a matrix organization where you both have the business responsibility reporting line of sight and also the digital, right? I think you get the best of both. I think the customer gets the best outcomes that way. Yeah.
100%. And I think, we've gone through several evolutions. And I would say, when we were starting out, we were probably off to the side. But at the scale at which we operate, that, to your point, is just non-productive, right? Or unproductive.
So we haven't talked about AI yet. We're a few minutes in. It seems these days you can't even spell retail without AI. We're going to talk about your panel, which is AI that powers a more confident customer journey. We're going to get to that in a bit. But first of all, you've been in this game a long time, this technology piece. I have as well. AI is not the first technology I've talked about in my career that was going to get us closer to this one-to-one, high relevance, the right message at the right time to the right people. And as a technology leader, how do you approach understanding new technologies? Kind of like asking, how do you parse the signal from the noise, right? There's lots of noise about a technology. It gets into a hype cycle. But then how do you and the team think about this is real and we should really dig in on this particular technology or this set of technologies?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, I would say, so many discussions and debates happen internally, around those types of things. You hear about a new technology and everyone's sort of very excited and want to deploy it, but you got to ground yourself, right? And so I'll sort of talk about two things that we always make sure we start with and sort of walk you through some of the ways in which, we do that. So the first is being extra clear, really understanding what is the underlying problem we are trying to solve. And does the technology, in fact, address that problem or not? And I'll give you an example. And then the second is, compared to the solution that we have today for that problem, is the new technology or solution orders of magnitude better at solving it? And how would we prove that it is or is not? And so, I know you were talking about one-to-one marketing or personalized experiences, and I'll give you this example that happened internally. Now, of course, we have a strong loyalty program, as we were talking about it. And so based on transaction histories that we have a good sense of what someone may or may not want, in their weekly shop from a grocery perspective. And so it should be pretty obvious for us to be able to do one-to-one, marketing or segmentation or, experiences. But one of the challenges that we always ran into was, let's say that, a customer is both a vegan and a parent, right? Many of the technologies that we had made available to us couldn't at the real time figure out which one of the two should we more index or anchor into. And our challenge became, we segmented them into one and all of the content was only for that area. Right. Whereas the customer themselves may not identify in only one of those two segments. But what some of the new technologies are able to do for us is, at scale, enable us to do real-time tagging, not just on the customer preferences, but also on products and services. And I think when we saw that, where, with very little, let's say, effort or time, even delays, we could do that mapping in real time. It told us that this technology is significantly better than what we had today, right? And so I know this was just one example, but, the bottom line always is, we stay away from solutions in search of a problem and ground ourselves into problems that can truly be solved with new solutions.
Yeah, it's well stated. I remember when we were going through the data at Zellers, we were having a hard time parsing between a gifting grandmother and a mother, because in many ways they look the same. And we did not have the power, back then that you have at your disposal. We just said, listen, grandmothers don't buy diapers. That's probably a pretty fair assumption. We kind of built our models around kind of a simple conclusion. Now, one last question about the technology, though. So it's one thing you've mentioned a couple of times the scale. So it's one thing to have a technology, but to be able to execute and roll it out at scale, how is that does that reflect in the culture? How do you prioritize your work? You have more resources than perhaps a smaller or other retailers. That doesn't mean you have infinite resources. You've got to be very smart about how you spend every dollar. So just a few seconds on how you kind of prioritize that work.
Again, another really good question, and I think we sort of have a culture, and I think I'll allude to this more. So the fact that Loblaw Digital initially got created as as a separate team enabled us to create more of an experimentation culture. I think obviously the retail side of the business is well established, mature. They understand how to do things, whereas what we had to do was to figure our way out. And so embedded in our culture is the concept of always testing, challenging, validating, and then scaling, which is not new. I would say, most technology companies operate that way, but I think we make sure that it's set in our prioritization framework. And so the way that it works is we begin with OKRs, which is objectives and key results. And all of our annual planning, our quarterly planning are based on what are the core objectives we are trying to drive. And those objectives are generally customer-centric, but also help drive the business. And the key results are metrics that we know if we can change will drive the objective effectively. And so all of our initiatives are driven towards, are they going to move a particular key result well or not? And the way we describe new ideas is write a 2-page memo that talks about the problem that exists, therefore the objective that we are trying to achieve, why we believe a particular approach is going to have a better impact on the key result than the one that we have in market today, and how are we going to prove it? And so to get to scale, we have this validation phase where we talk about how do you validate your most critical assumptions in a memo, right? So, for example, you were talking about gifting mothers versus mothers. If that's the core problem you're trying to solve, how do I distinguish between those two? The solution that you have should be able to do at least that effectively. And so, we would deploy the solution to say, is it doing that well? How often does it do that? Are there any hidden problems that we are finding? And if not, then we would scale. The advantage we have is because we have a large base of customers, the way we can test our technology is release it in a region or a set of customer attributes and see the performance before it's mass scale. But in order to do that effectively too, our architecture has to be scalable and adaptable, which is why we having our own engineering team is very important because our architecture is fully self-built, right? So we've built our entire e-commerce stack. It's composable, it's flexible, and enables us to do the testing and scaling the way we want it.
Right. It's built to prototype, but prototype at scale, right? Because it's, you need valuable lessons with data. A few people don't tell you the valuable lessons on that path to scaling. It's a great idea. Now let's turn our minds to what brought us on the mic together, which is generously appearing on the stage at RCC's store coming up in early June. Now you're going to be on the stage with a good friend of mine, actually, Dave Stevens from Group Dynamite. Give the people listening a bit of a preview about what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, of course. The topic of that conversation is around AI that powers a more confident customer journey. And as you said, right, we were 5 minutes in and we hadn't said the word and we had to eventually do it. And so, everything is about AI and agentic commerce and how they're changing the way customers are discovering products and services or making decisions on them. And, it's interesting because internally we've also sort of thought about, well, in this changing environment, definitely the third-party platforms, and I would call them third-party platforms, but, the likes of ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and others, they are platforms on which customers are discovering more. And I think we have inordinate amount of data that suggests that. And so obviously there's a place for us to play in that space. But that's not the be all and end all, right? We have to figure out how are we going to use these technologies to improve the experiences that we offer on our first party platforms, webs and apps, obviously. But I think that's going to be really the focus of my talk there, on how can you leverage these technologies to truly change, the customer journey, whether it be e-commerce or loyalty, whether it be discovery, communication, or search. And how do you bring this concept of conversational commerce or conversational interfaces in a good way into owned experiences or platforms?
Oh, fantastic. Well, you've got a great counterpart on the stage. It's going to be a great session. Now, last couple of questions for you. Yeah. Advice for your fellow retail technologists who are listening. AI, I've sometimes asked people, if you're a baseball fan, what inning do you think it is? And sometimes I get it, we're in the warm up, or we're in the second inning, or whatever it is. We're probably in earlier innings than later innings, or earlier in the evolution. What are the best practices for thinking about integrating AI into your marketing tech stack? Just, any ideas for your fellow retailers about, listen, these three things, no matter how big you are, here's what we've learned, and here's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, again, another really good question, and I think I'll begin with how we started this discussion internally, and it just sort of goes back to one of the points I made earlier, which is what's the problem that we're trying to solve, and one of the things that we had set out initially is that, hey, let's look at the process that we have today, in terms of our marketing stack, right? So, how do our marketing teams, let's say, segment data, or especially customer audiences? How do they create them? How do they use templates to communicate with them? What tools do we use? What data do we use? And so we had this whole process map done. And then we said, okay, what are the things that we would rather not do as a team, or today is a high friction point for us internally, or even for the customer, right? We feel, that if we didn't do this, or if we did this differently, it would be great for the customer or great for us internally because it'll open up bandwidth. And then we sort of said, okay, what's the right solution for this? Is it automation? Is it an agent that's able to generate insights for us that we can action faster? Is it removal of a particular step? And then sort of go out and say, do we need to build this or buy this, right? And so, in my mind, the step that I would encourage everyone to begin with is mapping out that process flow. And I think what happens is we sort of say, every time you're looking at a new problem, you'd go, it has to follow these steps, but we should just automate them. And in fact, one area where we found a lot of, let's say, benefit or opportunity is saying, well, actually, forget about these steps. What is the end goal that we're trying to achieve? And could we rewrite this process completely? And I think that's where AI has started to become more material for us, where we are rewriting processes from the get-go, which is also changing how our marketing teams actually look at their function. And so mapping that process, I would say, is one key step, and then figuring out whether you want to rewrite the process or automate a portion of it is step 2. And I think after that, things become really clear in terms of the next steps.
Well, last question for you. You mentioned sometimes, occasionally, you might buy versus build yourself. Any advice there's probably a technology solution person or company listening that might want to have a discussion with your team as something they think they can offer? What's the best way to get on your team's radar screen? You probably get a lot of pitches. What's the best chance? What's the best way to approach you? Even practically, how to get in touch, or what makes the difference between an outreach that is successful and one that is less successful?
Yeah, and I think again, it's weird. We use very simple frameworks, but I think they end up working pretty well with us. So one is a clear articulation of the problem that solution is solving, and why their solution is, we call it the 10x better solution, sure. Right? And sometimes it's very simple. I'd get a note from someone that's trying to, trying to tell us hey, we should work with you, and it's 2 sentences. They're like, here's what we are solving, and here's why we are better than everything else that's in the market, and we're pretty sure you're using this one, and here's why that works. And we would take a call instantly at that point, because we are like, oh, someone's found a new way of solving this problem that's much better than what we have available. So
that was like, I'll have a listen to that. We'll consider it, see if it fits. great advice. For those who want to get in touch, are you a LinkedIn person? What's the best way to get in touch with your team or yourself? You're obviously a very busy executive. Maybe there's a general inbox for it. How do you get in touch?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is is probably the best way to get in touch with me. You can find me and send me a note. And generally, like that's also how I discover new teams that I want to interact with. And that first chat note obviously helps.
Or, of course, they could come see you on the stage live on the Retail Council Canada stage.
Yes,
they could see you in real life, IRL, as the kids said. Well, Rohit, thanks so much for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. I look forward to myself meeting you in person a little later in the summer. Until then, congratulations on what you and the team been able to achieve, and I wish you all continued success.
Thank you so much. It was great chatting with you, Michael, and I look forward to meeting you in person at the conference.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.